works program can potentially wait until a subsequent time. But if we could get through all these slides today, it would be really good. We're going to finish this session at 1, so we can have a half-hour break before the meeting this afternoon. So, Councillor Wilson, Nigel, and if anybody else had questions previously, could you pop your microphones back on? Thanks.
Okay, so just a couple of points here. One is, when Waka Kotahi give us this glorious gift, and the ownership of that will actually be, in real terms, a liability. So does the council have it in its gift to say thanks but no thanks? Or must we accept this gift, this Trojan horse?
Well, the legislator is, so whether if we said no, we don't want it. So it's the Minister of Transport revokes the road under instruction from Waka Kotahi. I don't believe there's any ability to say no, thank you. You can certainly argue about the condition of it and what it might mean in terms of cost for council as part of that process. And I think in Taupo and Tauranga, where there's been revocation processes up there, they've taken extensive amount of time because of arguments around cost. And I think it was 10 years possibly in Taupo. But so yeah, no, we can't say no, but we can certainly look to maximise any contribution towards basically the work that's happening at the moment. And on that, NZTA have changed their policy on the back of potentially what they've agreed to do here, to now make it a lot harder for councils for them to fund fit for purpose, which is the previous structure around revocation. And yeah, and we're still pushing back on some work that we think needs to be done that they haven't done. So that's a conversation that is live at the moment and may end up coming back to the council if they're not prepared to do some of the what we think is the minimum requirements for vesting that road back to council. And at the moment they're looking at finishing the capital works February. Sorry, that was the last February, March, April. At the moment in Waikanae, and then we will be into April. Then there will be a conversation then around the process and the legal side of it, and where does that sit in terms of what our view is.
Good. Okay, I'd like to see us staying on top of that one. The other one is the developer contribution has gone from 3.3 million to 2.07. So the first question is what in particular has led to that 30% decrease, 35% decrease?
So less than our projected growth. So our projected growth hasn't occurred. We've experienced less growth than anticipated.
Okay. So the question is, of the 3.3 million that we did receive, how much of that was cash?
I'm presuming that the figure there doesn't include land. It only includes funds injected. Am I right about that?
Well, that's a presumption, so I think we should test that.
Yeah, I'm testing that right now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, look on the board. Those are budgets. So that's 3.9 million is budgeted cash, as is the 2 million. Recently, there's been as part of the DC, we received some land. So that's not in that. It's not in that number. So that is cash. That we budget for cash because it's a building block for our revenue, for our debt drawdown.
Okay, so the budgeted 2.07. That's you're budgeting that as cash as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So how much land are we getting? What's the value of the land, and where does that appear in the balance sheet?
So through you, Madam Chair, look, it's probably for another session, but where the land, which generally speaking, development contributions don't come in by way of land; they come in by way of cash. And how when we do receive land, we actually recorded it as part of our work in progress on our CapEx project because it creates an asset. So we haven't budgeted to receive land as part of future developments. We've only budgeted for DCs. But look, as I said, development contributions and how you pay them and financial contributions is a specialist area, and that would be a conversation for another day. But we have not budgeted. We're budgeting for cash at the moment. We aren't budgeting for land in lieu of development contributions. We're trying to actually get our other revenue streams up so that we can keep rates down.
So there's a substantial argument to be made for increasing developer contributions, and we'll no doubt have that conversation. But who decides that level? Who decides what the level will be, and is it done on a per? I mean, what's the basis for it?
Yes, so through you, Madam Chair. So at a very high level, the council actually decides. You adopt the policy. So we do the work, we do the recommendations, and it's a balance. So it's very easy to have the highest development contributions in the country, but the downstream effect of that is you won't have any development. So you've got to. There's a number of considerations because the developer will actually just transfer that onto the property owners. But anyway, it is a subject that needs much more discussion. But council approves the development contributions policy, which is what we charge per ihu, I think it's called.
Who is it? Habitable unit. But so just to add, so it has to be though linked to investment in infrastructure that's required as a result of growth. So, and we can, new reservoir for Paraparumu, technically you can allocate, how much of that is required to deliver back to the growth component of the catchment. You can only then use that to define, that value is then distributed across the number of development units that we know are potentially coming, and that sets the amount. So it's quite a structured process to get a number.
That's cool. I'm looking forward to that conversation. We were talking before about non-essential spending and where we can have a look at that, and we did get onto that heady subject of glossy documents, and the glossy document hater sitting next to me has already been marginalised. But as everybody knows who's been involved in those things, they know that the most substantial cost isn't actually printing, it's production. So you still have to employ a designer and produce and all the rest of it, even if it's just going to be an online version. So printing them is a marginal utility as far as cost is concerned. But in terms of sort of extrapolatable microcosms of unnecessary spending, I got a couple of recent examples, one of which was in Waikanae, and there's just a very quick example, a couple of mobility parking spaces. So normally what would happen is you'd get a man or a lady with a pot of yellow paint who would paint a yellow line, and you'd put a sign going mobility, you can park here, nobody else. But what we got is a full consultants report, engineering consultants report from a company in Auckland. I don't know if they know where Waikanae is, but they did a full report. Now, God knows what that cost, and that seemed like incredibly unnecessary expenditure. We do know that in the dying days of Te Urihi, money was being spent. Like $150,000 continued to be spent on internal design of a building that politically looked like it was dead in the water. And so things like that, those aren't little numbers. And even individually, if they are, they add up. So when we say have a look at those lines, I think there's a lot of lines to have a look at. And Kapiti doesn't have a great track record in terms of legal costs. OIAs, once upon a time, a reasonable question by a member of the public was treated automatically as an OIA. During public speaking, we'll treat that as an OIA. Just give the answer would have been a really good idea. So those kind of things. Thank God we don't have many OIAs. I haven't seen that many as there used to be. And councillors themselves had to put in OIAs for information. So those kind of costs, I would really like to see an examination of that sort of thing. And I will leave it at that.
Thanks, Nigel. Rob?
Oh, thank you. Madam Chair, thanks. Mark, thanks for this glossy presentation. As a new councillor, even I can get my head around it. Hey, just got a bit of a question on your terms. You made a reference to terms and conditions of contract on your OPEX costs. I don't want to get into detail, but does that refer to things like the minimum wage and higher building costs that the contractors and more conditions being harder on you? Is that causing the increase in the OPEX?
Thanks. So some of those issues are causing increases in cost, but the reference here is cost fluctuation that is actually embedded in the contract document itself. So there's an annual CPI adjustment that's required under the contract that we have with Higgins, who have a 5-year contract in terms of maintenance for the network. So, and that's linked to Waka Kotahi produce an escalation figure every year, and you're obliged to pay that directly to the contractor. So there's an amount that's fixed. Same with Fulton Hogan, who look after our streetlights. They have, because they're longer duration contracts than maybe a civil. Yeah, 12 months. These go for 5 years, so you have to reflect an increase in terms of CPI.
Okay, thanks for that. Not the short-term contracts, just the ongoing long-term. Thanks, Tom.
Glenn?
I had a couple of questions and I guess a couple of observations. As I have said previously, I'm not comfortable with 7.9 and I'm certainly a lot less comfortable with 8.1%. And it would be my request that we try and get that down by as much as we can. In terms, we sit here and talk about percentages, but in terms of what it actually means, so for example, my rates, I'll talk about mine because I know what they are, they're $5,600 my rates a year. So by the end of the next, I haven't got a flash house. There'll be others who pay more. So I'll be over 6,000 on our next, by the time we pay our next lot of rates. And then assuming 8% next year, I'll be getting closer to 7. And so year by 3, I'll be 7,500. So at what point, and I'd add over $4,000 for insurance. I'm over $10,000 a year just to breathe before I pay my water and my power, which is not a boohoo session, but there's a lot more people who are more vulnerable, who are vulnerable. My father-in-law, he's $3,500 a year, and he doesn't eat steak now. He finds the cheapest mince he can get, and he gets 4 meals out of it. So I think it's our duty to be laser focused, and I'm not saying that the staff aren't laser focused, but my first question is when does it stop, or is this going to completely just go up 8 to 10% for the next, in 4 years' time, it's going to be almost doubled because it's compounding as well, right? So I guess, Mark, my question is this just a hamster wheel that will never stop, or?
Stops when we fix the funding mechanism for local government, as Martin would agree with. Yeah.
Yeah, which was sort of alluding to. Is there anything being done in that space, or nah? It's just too hard, too big.
Well, the future for local government, whatever that is,
Okay.
but it's something that local government's been pushing for forever. I've got a Zone 4 meeting coming up next Friday. I think a remit from Zone 4 would be really good around that.
Definitely.
That we don't want to wait for the future for local government. We want the funding mechanism for local government fixed.
Yep, that'd be awesome.
And as a high priority because it just can't carry on.
Good. Thank you. I like that. And secondly, it's sort of like we going around and trying to come up with ideas to help. But for me, it's our role is to put pressure on the CE, and it's for him and his leadership team to come back with the ideas. We could sit here and discuss all day around Simplot here, there, and everywhere. But I actually think our role is better suited or more appropriate to put pressure on the CE to come back with the answers. With all due respect, obviously. Yeah, and that may be. Yeah, I'm not going to then go and offer suggestions, but yeah. So that would be my request, is that he goes away and works harder. Not that you're not working hard, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a recognition there that a lot of work's been done already to get it down to where it is. But the message that's coming from today is we'll live with it, but we want the staff to go away and just have another look.
You know, probably, Lawrence, I understand what Mark's saying and the tensions and how bloody hard it is. But I want more. The community wants
Thanks, Glenn. Sounds like your father-in-law might be eligible for rates remission.
Yeah, I'll find out.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Can I just raise a very quick question?
Yeah.
On rates rebate?
Hang on, I'm just going to go to Kim.
No, you
'cause-
can.
oh, well, can you press your button, Kim, please? And then press it again. Martin, yep,
That hasn't been adjusted at all. So you're basically sitting on.
press your button.
If you're sitting pretty much with the rates rebate ceiling is pretty much based on, is now sitting under the minimum wage. That sort of thing. It hasn't been adjusted at all. And that sort of stuff. So there's got a lot of people in our community at the moment that can't even apply for it because of those sorts of reasons. We've fallen into that trap as such. And I know it's central government because we just act as a facilitator for that. But I did want to flag that because I was quite surprised when I went through the figures for the rates rebate, actually where the thresholds sit.
Through you, Madam Chair. So look, that is correct, Councillor Halliday. So I'm not particularly close to the detail, but they do reset that from time to time. But what this council has done to recognise that is they've increased the budget for the rates assistance. So recognising the fact that perhaps those thresholds are a little bit slow and changing. I think the council put in an extra $150,000 for rates assistance. So, which is over and above what a lot of councils actually do. So there's some very good tools in the tool chest to help ratepayers. That and I think we actually found that that was oversubscribed as well. So.
Thanks, Martin. She had Kim next and then Richard.
Kia ora. This is just a pet peeve of mine, so I don't know whether I should raise it, but it's about the actual versus the perception of these budgets. Now, I have no doubt that there are some complicated financial formulas that go behind all of this, and this has been gone through with a fine-tooth comb. I get that. It's still high, yes. Would I love it to be lower? Yes. And when we compare business as usual, like people in the community doing business with how the council has to do business, there's this whole level of bureaucracy and rules and regulations that council has to abide by that the private sector doesn't have to abide by. So I can cut my own budget, but if I had to do that in council, I would have to consult with everyone in town before I cut my own budget. So that has a cost to it. And I've always wanted to actually have that like in a picture so people can understand the difference, because the perception is council takes ages to do anything and it costs 10 times as much as anyone else. I would love to be able to, and I don't want you to go through a whole nother exercise and spend another $1,000 doing it, but to be able to just put that in a picture of how much a staff member spends on engagement, how much they spend on fitting into the rules they have, and how much time they actually spend on delivering that service, to give people an idea of actually what that looks like and the constraints council have on that. It's my pet peeve, because, and I know we're here and we have to engage, I get that, but it comes at a cost, and people look at a project and they forget that cost that's there, and that's just my little pet peeve I have. That's all.
Thanks, Kim. We'll follow up on that. And I think Darren has a response. Can we have Darren's microphone on, please? It doesn't seem to be coming on automatically.
Thank you. Just real briefly, really good
Usually
question.
comes on.
So I've asked for a piece of work that looks at productivity for us to understand how effective we are in the delivery of service, and what does our efficiency level look like. Initial indications are reasonably positive, but I want to do a deep dive, and we'll bring that back.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Richard.
I'm listening to all this, and the first point that Mark made this morning, one of the very first, was we're just using the long-term plan that we have, and that says 7.9, so we're going from there. If councillors are really serious about changing it, they have to go back and challenge the last long-term plan. Otherwise, let's just move on. 7.9 to 8.1 is neither here nor there in the great scheme of things, but unless councillors, and it's not me, thank goodness, are really prepared to go back, and it's probably far too late now. This should have been done your very first session that you had as a new council. Unless you're prepared to go back and change everything, and by changing everything you have to consult with everyone, it's too late, and we've probably wasted 2.5 hours this morning talking about something we have no ability to change except for glossy brochures. Sorry.
So Richard, yeah, for instance, there is a local example of that. Horowhenua are going out and consulting on an LTP. So to change everything, that's what you've got to do. You've got to do a variation to your LTP. So that's basically going through an LTP consultation a year early. And that's because they want to make some changes to the landfill, amongst other things. So we were too late for that by the time this council was elected. They started that halfway through last year. So that would have actually had to have been a decision by the previous council. By the end of last year, it was too late, really, to do that. I can be corrected, but yeah, it would have been a scramble against time, and good decisions wouldn't have been made. So it is a little bit of either a deliberate structure of local government or a little bit of an anomaly that a new council who comes in doesn't get to make those huge changes straight away. They've kind of got to suck it up and go through an annual plan process, and then there's an opportunity to make some substantial changes through the long-term plan, unless you do what Horowhenua did and start it early and ahead of time and do it that way. And the other thing is that we did come together and did make a decision to not make material changes that would have required a whole lot of consultation at a time when we were using a whole lot of staff resources to do work programs for our committees, including our major committee. When we were doing a strategic vision to feed into the long-term plan, we decided to focus our resources on that long-term big picture thinking so that we can really get it right into the future, rather than scrambling around trying to achieve savings through this annual plan process and through a consultation there. So it was a conscious decision by this table. It wasn't an oversight. May not agree with it, but that's the decision that we all made. So just watch the space, I guess, for the next year and see what happens. Do you want to close the loop on that?
Yeah, thank you. It was not my point to criticise the council for not doing it.
Didn't take it as a criticism.
Just to point out that really it's far too late to
to make any serious changements. 1% is 800,000. To drop 800,000 out of what looks like an already tight budget just seems quite difficult, and perhaps we're just talking because for the sake of it, seems to me.
Yeah,
Well, I do.
I think it still provides some useful steers going forward, and we've also we've had some good thoughts around the table as regards how we communicate all of this, and councillors are gradually developing a better understanding of how things work. So I don't think it's been a waste of time. But yeah, I'll go to Nigel now.
Yep, just in terms of wasting time. By the way, there's a reason that you go into a shop and something is still being sold for $7.99. It's because $7.99 is far more attractive than $8. 8.1 is 8% plus. 7.9 is 7% plus. Just saying. So you don't have to shave a whole lot to get it back to that 7.9. And I suspect there's a reason they fell on 7.9, and it's the supermarket cost anyway. And just to correct myself, just keeping up with the times, when I said we were gifting to the banks, those poor struggling banks, when we were gifting them $144,000 a week, actually we will be gifting them $171,000 a week, every week, until the debt goes up again, and then we'll gift them some more. So I know debt's in itself isn't an evil thing, but in terms of real numbers and real costs and who's paying, the public are. So we just need to be mindful of that, and I'm sure we are.
Thanks, Nigel. I think we're ready to move on. Fees and charges.
Slide 23.
Slide 23. We're skipping over a few, and then we're going to come back, hopefully. That works out.
Sorry. 23.
Are we all good?
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, councillors.
Thank you, Paula.
I'd like to present to you a small variation, a list of variations of the local government cost index increase of 4.2%. There are a few new fee proposals as well that I'll let you know what the revenue impact of those will be. All the rest of the changes are being deemed as insignificant revenue-wise or are able to be incorporated in the current draft budgets. So they support the new changes. So next slide. Next slide, yeah. So the first one is building consent. We've got residential new buildings alterations that they wish to increase to large-scale building fees. So that makes the schedule more consistent. By the way, you'll get a full schedule in the next workshop as well. Process refund application by technical staff to align with effort. So that is going up by 87%. So that just reflects that's the technical officers that have to do and complete the refund review, and it just aligns to time spent. Application for certificate of acceptance. That is going up by double, as you can see. So we took the 22-23 rate and doubled that and added 4.2, and that was increased to discourage customers from taking that route as a cheaper building consent option. And there's a couple of that are unchanged because they're not set by council. Environmental health, alcohol licensing fees are not set by council, set by regulation. That next one shouldn't be on there, so I changed that one. So that's all in regulatory. Community facilities. So we've got a couple of halls where we had some inconsistency in charges, the Waikana Memorial Hall and the community centre. So the activity manager has looked at those. and change those. Now, there's some big increases and also some big decreases, but in terms of the hours of rental use, the impact nets out to 0 pretty much. So, so you can see they're going out. I've itemised what those ones are, and they're much more consistent.
Assuming that's per hour, right?
Yes, that's per hour, yep. Libraries, we've got some increases that are more than 4.2%, rounding to the nearest dollar. For example, bestseller books going from $2 to $3, $2.50 to $3, and a few other ones I've listed there. Items like faxing and laminating, proposing to withdraw those because we can now scan and it's all free. So things like that. And administration fees for lost and damaged books, we charge for the replacement of the book. We're not going to charge the actual admin fee for that book. And some of the books are quite costly anyway.
I just got a question. What's a DVD?
DVD.
We still do have them.
Yeah,
What's a DVD?
yeah.
See, vinyl's caught up with DVD sales.
So obviously no increase in that one due to the online streaming markets. The activity manager's also indicated he would like to remove those fees altogether in the LTP, so just a heads up that he might be proposing that. So that's all in the library space.
Let's get to the end and then we'll just go through. That's
Swimming pools. I'll just go down to the no increase proposed ones first. So spa, sauna and hydroslide. So that's an add-on to the admission ticket. So the activity manager is proposing just to keep that as is. Now, shower only use. If someone wants to come and get a shower, it's $1.50. That's actually just, we've just put that in the schedule just to complete the schedule because it actually is being charged. So we need to have it in the schedule. But it's been recommended it goes to $2 for that one. That one. Just if we're charging, we need to have it in the schedule. So new fees. We've got a couple of concession tickets with Aquafit just to give a bit more variety in those types of tickets for customers. Now, spectator fee. Now, this spectator fee is proposed for $2, and it wouldn't apply to learn to swim or swim club parents or people that have to supervise under 8s. This,
sorry.
yeah, at the end, yeah. So this is proposed to offset considerable expense in managing the clean-up after visitors. And there's a lot of park users that come in in big groups that just come in to use the barbecue facilities. So they're using quite a lot of facilities. We still need to staff it because of the volume of people. And other councils actually do charge. For example, Wainuiomata Pool has got an outdoor park-like setting and they charge $2.70. Got a couple of examples of that. So the activity manager thinks that would bring in $11,000 to $14,000 worth of income. The thing is, we call it a spectator fee, but it's more like just users of facilities, people coming in just to put more pressure on it, and then often we have to close if we've got at capacity. So he's putting that up. The other one is the entry fee per person, per swimmer, in addition to lane hire, $1.50. So that excludes our learn to swim lessons, but it's just because of our commitment to providing swim clubs with access to our facilities. That means the public can't use the lanes as much. The way that would be collected would be the swimmers would have a card and they would just load it up with 20 trip, 30 trip, and it'd just be scanned. There'd be a list at the office, so it'd be a simple way to be able to collect that fee of $1.50. There are other pools that do charge this. Wellington City Council, I've got some fees here if anyone's interested, but there are other principals that do charge. Pororoa does, Upper Hutt. It will raise about $7,500 to $8,500. That's that one. It's all in swimming pools. Okay, in the infrastructure space, so in the labs, there's just some various tests that are going up more than LGCI due to consumable cost, shipping. There's some fees to do with iodine mileage that we've had to align. We've got some new volumetric fees proposed for trade waste that I've just listed there. At the moment, they're estimating about $6,000 a year, but it just foolproofs us for future if we have other big commercial operators coming into the district on that one. And then just some general organisational wide ones, land status change. Often developers request changing fee simple land parcels to roads, that sort of thing, general investigative work, so there's a new fee in there. And Official Information Act, we just kept that to what it's been recommended as, so it's a slight reduction or hasn't changed. So again, all those fees will be presented in the next workshop in a full schedule for you to have a look at.
And they're the only changes that are going to be in there?
They're the only changes, exception changes. So everything else is by 4.2%, except for those ones.
So our councillor's going to be able to get that full schedule. Where can they find that full schedule so they can check if there's nothing else they would suggest changing?
So I have it. I have it at the moment.
Could it be uploaded onto the hub, maybe?
Yep, we can
For
do
easy
that.
access? That'd
Yep.
be good. Okay, I'll start with Martin.
Thank you. Number 25, the building consents. I appreciate the second to bottom one where it says application for certificate of acceptance to align with effort as being that one-off fee. Although, but I'm struggling with $348 hourly rate after that. I mean, there's just something recently in the newspaper that called $500 being charged by consultants to government completely outrageous. $348, I mean, the professional services, you know, starting to get up there at around 160, 170. 348 just seems like a heck of a jump.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. A certificate of acceptance is an application to remedy the norms.
Sorry, we'll wait for a microphone because this is being recorded and it's live streamed.
The certificate of acceptance is essentially remedying a building consent that was never applied for, and so risk to council at the end of the process usually happens when Mark wants to sell his house and he's done a whole lot of unconsented works, and we get the limb and the real estate agent says, Mark, you haven't got your certificate of compliance, and it'll make your house harder to sell. So they apply for a certificate of acceptance, and what council are being asked to do is to retrospectively consent that all of the building works meet the building code. Now that becomes really difficult after everything's filled in and increases risk to council, because if we issue the CCC, liability shifts to council and future claims. So the 348 per hour is a tool to discourage the practice of not getting a building consent. Come and get a building consent, talk to the team, we'll talk you through. And so it's a disincentive to potentially rotting the system and putting council at risk. So hopefully that helps. The team think it'll be a good tool to do that. And notwithstanding, I understand exactly what Councillor Halliday is saying. In the cold light of day, it looks like a big amount, but it's actually a disincentive to not engage early in the process.
Right. Thanks for the explanation, James. Could I just get one bit of clarity there? The application for certificate of the actual application for certificate increasing from 348 to 725. Would that be for only 2 hours work, so to speak, or would it be for is there a definitive time frame for that as such? Or?
Look, that again through the chair, that's a deposit. And I suspect, given what the team have told me, is 2 hours won't cover it. We can't protect council and the ratepayer from the risk of, depending on the nature of the work, if it's a whole new dwelling, it will be potentially 20 hours of work. If it's a small alteration, then it could be 2 hours. So that is a deposit that that's $748.
Right, so pretty much you're up for maybe 4 or 5 hours regardless, and you've at that rate. Okay, that still seems. I hear what you're saying. Okay. The second one for me was the spectator fee. I hear what you're saying around Waikanae Pool. Can it be Waikanae Pool specific? Is that doable rather than other pools? Because I know, like, you know, say take the aquatic centre down here, there might be parents that have come from, say, Otaki to do that, and then they basically need to sit somewhere, that sort of stuff, so that they're not sort of going for a day trip as such. I appreciate that a lot of people do that at the Waikanae Pool with regards to that, so I have no issue about them being charged for being in that space for all the associated reasons, but I'm just wondering, is this going to be a fee across the board?
I think that's quite a good question. Mike?
Thanks, Councillor. Short answer is yes. This is specifically tailored around Waikanae, as you know, which is has barbecues and other costs. So, yes.
Sorry, yes, is it Waikanae specific, or is it yes across the board?
I think it's yes, it can be made Waikanae specific.
Correct.
And that will be adjusted accordingly. And
just my other sort of thing was just actually a clarification. Proposed increase for shower use. How does that work? Do we charge for shower usage in pools?
Yes. Some people pay to come in and use the shower.
Right. Okay.
Homeless people.
Yeah, yes, we do.
Okay. So there's no showers and changing rooms.
This is for people who are specifically coming in just to use the shower.
Okay. All right.
I think everybody else can use the shower as part of their entry fee. Yeah, I'm getting nods. That
Thank
finish your line of questioning? Thanks, Martin. Nigel?
Yeah, we need to really start slamming the homeless. That's just insane. If you take, I mean, with these things, when this is nickel and dime stuff, right? And if you take what is the total extra income, so say for instance when we're talking about you know, charging somebody $2 to go and sit at the pool or whatever it is, how that's usually estimated, what the additional income is, the process is normally you take the total number of people that you've got now and then you add whatever the dollars are. But what happens is, as you increase these things, there is eventually a tipping point at which you disincentivise people from using the public facility that they're otherwise paying for through their rates. And so sometimes what happens is your estimated increase actually becomes a decrease. It's a decrease both monetarily, less people are going, and it's a decrease in the public using the public facility. So one of the things, and we'll have the discussion obviously later on, but say for instance, and library charges, I personally don't think there should be any library charges for anything, but you know, we had an estimated proposal for the Waikanae Library, the new Waikanae Library, that would be 24 million. Well, that was nuts, so we stopped talking about that. But it came back to the rational 13.2 million. But if you said to the Waikanae community, I tell you what, we'll make that 13 million. You guys can only spend 13 million, not 13.2, and the other 0.2 is going to pay for all of the fees and charges increase across the entire district for the next 3 years. Are you cool with that? And they're going to go, of course we are. There's a real danger that in nickel and diming increases, that we lose sight of the point of what council provides public facilities for. And there's a point at which the public stop using their own facilities because of these incremental increases. It's a bigger picture argument.
It is a complex discussion, isn't it?
It is.
Because then, I mean, I think the whole point of some of these is they're meant to disincentivise people from using facilities for free that other people are paying for through their admission charges. And if you decided not to charge any fees at Waikanae Library, you couldn't charge any fees at any library.
I agree.
And then you ask the people in the community who don't use the library whether they're happy to have what would then be about a % increase on their rates, then you're starting to look at a different kind of scenario. I mean, that's just a guess based on your $200,000
Then they'd
if you
have to-
multiply that. But
Then they'd be forced to live in a,
Yeah,
in a
so-
literate, well-educated society, and that would be a disincentive. But one more, just one last piece for me, is in terms of the hike on some of those waste charges. You're probably aware, you will have read the same thing I read, that Waste Management, for instance, recorded a record profit last year. So some of the businesses that can afford to absorb some costs, maybe that's where some of the focus might be better placed rather than Mrs. Smith who wants to go and watch her grandchildren swimming at the pool. Anyway, that's my little...
unfortunately, we can't charge what waste management, we can't control what waste management charges. What we saw on the screen, it's trade waste, and I think that's all part of our waste reduction in the trade waste space, isn't it? And we'll have our recycling facility open by then, whatever it is.
So those charges are, trade waste, liquid trade waste discharged into the wastewater network, and they're trying to recover the cost relative to the biological load that comes from those facilities and what it costs us to treat at the treatment plant. So there's very few commercial operators in Kapiti that actually discharge anything at a scale that you could, and that's I think why the revenue was $6,000. But it better allows us, if someone does want to establish a large freezing work, something with a significant trade waste discharge,
Cheese factory.
we've got the ability to reflect what it costs us at the treatment plant to look at the nitrogen, phosphorus removal and all those elements of the treatment. So it's a charge that's new, so we haven't had that before.
Thanks for that clarification. I certainly needed it. Liz?
2 points from me. One is, if I read this correctly, we're now talking about charging people, or people will have to buy a ticket to the Kapiti Arts Trail. Is that correct?
There's no change to the Arts Trail structure of fees or what they are, so that one shouldn't have been on there.
I think what was on there anyway was participant, like artist participant fees. Yeah. But there
So-
isn't any change. That was a mistake.
It just says entry and guide only is no longer applicable. So that's a mistake, is it?
I think previous.
Right,
I
entry and
think
guide.
I
I'm
think
not sure what that-
previously.
There's some wording there that's not quite clear.
To me, that means that there used to be an option for artists to only go in the guide and not have any of the other support around the arts trail.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. So it's not
But
people wanting to
don't rely
go.
on anything that's on that piece of paper. But I think that's what it meant. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So it's for the artists, not for the. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. My other the other point relates to hall hire. So I'm involved with the management committee on the Ocean Road Community Centre, and we've noticed, or we've lost a number of groups in recent times, because what we're finding is that a lot of groups that meet in halls are now ageing, and they're getting down to numbers that make it uneconomic to hire a hall. I just wondered if you've got any information on the trends in hall hire and whether that's been taken into account in terms of setting rates, because if you've got 10 people meeting and they're paying $17 for the hall hire, that's for a retired person, that's quite a big, quite a bit of cost.
Okay,
so.
I'm going to put that in a parking lot for Mike to come back with as part of the facilities briefings that we're going to be having.
Okay.
Who's next? I think Liz is done.
Oh, that's okay.
Sophie?
Just a question around the entry fee for clubs and the lane hire at $1.50. I seem to remember this came back to us through an earlier process last triennium, and that we had a couple of people from the Raptors Swim Club, and some parents as well come and speak to us on the fact that obviously if you're paying to send your child to swimming, you're paying for the fees that are encompassed within that, and then also the club obviously has to pay for the overall lane hire, and then for every family or parent or for the potential student, if they're paying for their own swimming fees themselves, then that's another $1.50 every time that they're making use of that lane. And for some of them that's 3 or 4 times a week, because they're training a lot to get prepared for what are some pretty big competitions that now we have. Obviously a facility that can help to support them in training for that. So I just wonder, I remember this conversation coming up before, and there was some kind of, some concern around how that would affect people continuing to stay in the kind of swimming sports.
Look, I wondered about this one too, because I think it falls into the nickel and dime category that Nigel was talking about. The palaver of setting up those cards for them to load up and then monitor. And and also the lane hire already being a recognition of the fact that other swimmers don't get to use those lanes. I wonder if this is one that we just say not worth the battle. Are we allowed to say that? Does everybody agree?
Yeah, I'm personally keen on that.
Yep. I just wanted to add that every swimmer actually has a card they have to scan anyway, which is to say they've come through, so they don't have to pay. So it's already set up as a facility anyway, but I'll definitely feed that back to the activity manager.
I'd personally be in favour of just taking that one off.
Yeah, particularly if we got feedback around it last time.
I seem to remember
I think I remember that
yeah,
too.
yeah.
Do you remember that, Martin or Jocelyn?
Yeah, I saw Martin.
You remember
nodding.
that? Sean remembers that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I reckon we've got a bit of a steer that's not one that we want to change.
Yeah. Yeah, don't get in there.
The current revenue and financing policy is, I think it's 25 to 30% around that is funded by fees, and the ratepayer pays the balance.
Yeah, so the people who use children, for instance, get free sports field use. So there's a whole big picture. But for this one, for this time, having to hear submissions from people who, I just, not worth it for $1.50 per swimmer per time. It's not huge quantities.
Yeah.
Suggest there's one other component, and that's the staff who come under the pressure to collect these things. So in libraries, the book has gone up. The poor old librarian is the front line, and they're the ones that cop the flack, and I think that should be factored in. It can be really unfair on the staff who have to impart the burden of extra costs.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. Good point. Kathy?
Oh, thank you. So the 4.2%, is that being put on top of the sports grounds charges? Is that included in the 4.2%?
Yes.
It is, okay. Well, I'm speaking here on behalf of many struggling families out in the community at the moment who cannot pay the sports fees charges on top of their fees at the moment. So, and I think council, we have a responsibility to ensure of the health and well-being of our young people. And as I said, there's many families who cannot afford the fees now, along with all the sporting gear, even though the rugby league club help in that. So just wondering if they could be excluded, would there be an impact on rates or quite what? Because I think it's important that our young people get out and play sport, and that the cost is not a barrier.
I think Mark's going to answer the question, will it have an impact on rates?
So thank you, Madam Chair. So look, it's a tricky one, that for sure. What the council currently does is, as part of we have I think there's 9 different parts to our rates remissions policy. So what council currently does at the moment is for most of the sports clubs, they actually get at least 50% of their rates remitted. So the council, and look, that is common practice. So we already recognise that that's common practice in the sector. So as long as they're a not-for-profit, they're providing social recreation, they're providing sporting facilities, depending on how they rate it. So if they pay half of the rates anyway, then they get the other half remitted, except for water. So we're also working with all of the sports clubs through insurance, because insurance is one of the, and particularly where they're occupying a building that we own. So in some cases they're on the top floor and we operate at the bottom. So we already do something to help them, because we do recognise that. I know it's not enough, but we are doing something at least.
Oh, okay, yeah, thanks. It's just that I've, talking around and speaking around, I know some families are finding the cost of getting their children into sport a barrier, and I think we have a social responsibility to ensure the health and well-being of our families. So it's just a concern, but I thought if it wasn't that much impact on rates, we could perhaps just leave the sporting ground fees alone.
So does everybody else want that to come back? Like the option of excluding? Yeah, so we can look at that as part of that workshop. Yeah, so I would have understood that would be the individual fees and charges, but we can look at that percentage increase as well as part of that workshop. That'd be great. Jocelyn, thanks, Kathy.
Thank you. Yes, I'll start at the top. So under, it's not everything. So just clarification, under the building consents, it's got residential building alterations, $500,000 upwards, alley rate to align with the large scale commercial building fee. So I suppose there's two parts to this. One is that $500,000 residential building doesn't mean to say it's a large building, is the first point. The second point is, I just happened to look online to see what it was now, and it currently is actually the same as the retail buildings, but the retail building isn't going up, which means that, hold on, maybe I'm looking at the wrong area. The residential ones actually aren't in here. The prices aren't in here. So yeah, so I'm just, there's no figure there. If it would be interesting to know what that figure was, please.
Sorry, what would you? So can we come back to this when we all have it in front of us,
Okay.
and when we have all the fees and charges in front of us? Because at the moment,
Yeah.
we're all scrambling to find the information. So let's park that.
Yeah, so maybe then rather than having a percentage rise, or you can have the percentage rise, but also have the figure there next to it will be useful.
Okay.
Because the figure's
so
not there.
The figure as well as the percentage rise.
Yeah.
Yep, got that.
Okay. So I just wanted to raise the point that Martin raised. So the first 2 hours is actually a different rate to what it is after the second 2 hours. Is that how it works?
James is going to
After
answer
the
that
first
one.
2 hours.
James is going to answer that one.
Yeah, look, thank you through the chair. Now, that 740, actually, if you bring the slide up, so I'm actually talking about the right numbers, not confusing you further. But the 748 or whatever the number is the deposit to start that process. And then there'll be the 725, dyslexia. Then the 348 is the hourly rate. And as I explained before, it's the disincentive to push people in earlier into the process around getting a building consent.
Sorry, just clarify that because I just clicked on that one. The first 2 hours are covered. This charging rate is for additional hours on top of that.
Yeah, so that's wanted to clarify the bullet point after that. It says hourly rate after the first 2 hours goes from 167 to 348. So the first 2 hours is a different rate.
When we come back, can
Right,
we have a little
okay.
table around this one, and then we can make a final call on it there.
Because I suppose too, and I hear what you're saying about disincentivising people to do stuff that isn't being consented, but I'm wondering whether this is something that needs to be brought in, slightly slower, flagging that this will be coming rather than doing it now, because there will be a lot of people out there now who have got no choice in the matter. It's about changing you know, the actions further down the line.
I'm not understanding what the question is.
So it's a case of where, so this is planned to come in 1st of July next year, but there are people there, so this is about changing people's behaviour, and by actually bringing that in now, it can't actually change the behaviour of all those people who have actually done some building changes without consenting it. It's about moving forward and actually bringing this in slower so that over the next year or so, it incentivises people to get those resource consents rather than collecting money this way.
So James or Darren, they're fighting over it?
I'll have a crack, James. This is not about resource consents, it's about building consents. You build something without a consent, you then have to retrospectively get the consent. So everyone who is doing it properly and is complying is disadvantaged by the small few who refuse to comply. So by putting this penalty, for want of a better word, in place, makes them realise that the next time they do something, they're better off to do it properly and apply for a building consent, rather than giving them an opportunity to correct the action that has already occurred, which was wrong. So do we disincentivise or penalise the 80% of the community who complied and pay what is a big fee? Let's be clear on that. A building consent is not cheap, but undertaking building is not cheap in itself, and there are central government fees and levies attached to that. So it's really important that we are fair in our approach to everyone in our community. So I don't think we should be incentivising non-compliance.
I certainly agree with that, but I can see your logic, and so I accept that. Okay. So the other one I just wanted to move on to was the community facilities, and I know I've raised this several times before about having more consistent charges, hourly charges for the halls, and thank you for looking at this. So I suppose, so I looked online before, and I think one of the buildings that have been raised was the Waikanae Beach Hall, which I think is still $13 an hour. And when you compare, I suppose, those facilities with the other facilities which are of a similar price or slightly more, there's still no comparison in terms of the facilities are quite poor. The activity manager's indicated that's going to be an LTP review. So he's Okay.
a certain level of review on some of the main inconsistencies, but he will be committed to looking at that in the LTP.
Yeah. Okay, particularly when I think the whole complex for the Waikanae Memorial Hall is $26, and $13 per hour.
So we'll look at all the facilities,
Yeah, okay.
the kitchen facilities,
Okay.
what's there.
Okay.
But I'll definitely pass that message on.
Okay, thank you.
Again to him.
And yeah, so with the swimming pool, these proposed fee changes for the swimming pools, I actually, I can see how the $2 spectator fee would work, and for someone who uses the Waikanae swimming pool quite regularly, I do see the numbers of people who go in there, and often they're not actually local ratepayers, they're from elsewhere. They use...
So Jocelyn, do you agree with that fee?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I think we
I
all
do.
agree. We're all in agreement around that.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, okay, yeah. So, well, maybe we can have a conversation later on that, but I've got some insights into that. Then in terms of the lane hire, I don't actually agree with that, and I suppose except every annual plan and long-term plan that's come up for many times. And I know we've heard about training clubs, but there's also the Waikanae Swimming Club, and they do that. They provide a service which has a fee attached to it at the beginning of the season. This is about people learning to swim. This is not about training.
Yeah. So I think we've agreed that we're going to scrap that one.
So I'm just reiterating that.
Thanks.
And then the other one I had, no, I think that was about it.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
Yep, thank you.
Kim, well, I really want to get through the CapEx slide, so if it's a
I
burning
can
question.
have a question offline.
Yeah, if you
want.
just very quickly, if you could let us know what it's about, and
It's
we
just
might
about
park
the
it.
it's the building consent, and I get that it's a incentive not to build without consents, but does it take into effect when there's been a consent change? So over time the consent conditions change and they get more rigorous. Does it take into consent that because you might have had something that consented when it was built, the condition changed? Do you then have to come back and get that accepted again?
No, no, that's great. Easy answer. Rob?
Yeah.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Thanks, Paula. And James, look, I've just got a couple of comments and a question. One is about the building consents. When you've finished your building, you're given, 2 years before you have the Code of Compliance issued. If you don't have your Code of Compliance issued in that time, you then have to get a building certificate, don't you? Do you reckon that's fair if the communications aren't... I've had 2 clients where that's, the communications haven't got through and they've actually had to start all over again with the building.
We're having a conversation around fees and charges only. We're not having a wider discussion around building
it triggers on a
consents.
double dipping charging regime, and I just want to clear that up. The other one was charging for groups. In all fairness, council, the community boards play an active role in supplying or with their grants, giving money to groups who are organised to use the pools and things. And also with reference to DVDs, are you going to get records back in? They're $85 each now. Thank you.
I don't think so. Okay, we're going to try and whip through as much of the capital works.
I did have one more question.
No, we're going to go on now to the capital works
Okay.
because we've got 15 minutes. Sorry, Jocelyn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks everybody. So look, we were asked to come back and provide you the detail of our capital works program and on LG Hub or was emailed to you. And I think you've all got hard copies as the detail. So so the starter for 10 slide, as I'm sure you've all got lots of questions, but I think this is an important slide. So it's basically just showing, look, for the current financial year 22-23, we've got a budgeted capital works program of 84.7 million in the orange bar, and we are forecasting at this stage, and this may change, but we're forecasting to be under at 73.6 million. So what will happen is, as part of the annual plan, we'll be seeking your approval to authorise capital carryovers. So where you've got projects that are underway at the moment, where for whatever reason we can't finish, we don't simply lose the budget, we transfer that budget that goes across the next year, and that does impact on the work program. If we look at, you asked us to show you what's happening in the out years. So if you can see 23-24, we have got an annual plan budget. So far we're indicating to you that the CapEx budget for next year, which includes carryovers, is 88.7 million. The LTP was lower at 72.4. Now that makes perfect sense because for every single year that we've been tracking as part of the long-term plan, we haven't yet been able to achieve the full budget for a number of reasons: COVID, supply constraints, etc. Then if you looked at 24-25, you can see that's a crazy number. It's sitting at 129.4. So what the orange bars represent is we do an LTP, those are in the grey bars. When we do an annual plan, we are constantly looking at, we've got carryovers coming through, we're working with our GMs, we're working with our asset managers, and everything's being pushed out. So right now, a whole lot has been moved into 24-25 with a cumulative impact of 129.4. If things continue as they are, there is no ways we have the capacity to do $129.4 million worth of work. So, and LTP assumed we'd have a CapEx program of 71.3. Same's happened with 25, 26. Sometimes projects don't get just shifted out 1 year, they get shifted out multiple years, or there's a project that spans multiple years, and if that's delayed, it all moves across in sequential. So you can actually see, in terms of the annual plan, our annual plan is showing you that when we change our CapEx project, we're pushing a lot of stuff out because of the environment we're in, and we're way above the LTP budget. And this is why we do LTP. So as part of the LTP, you get a chance to revisit this. Couple of points. It's a balancing act. It's not just an easy task to say, oh, well, you know, shave 25 million off, push it in the out years. There's a number of things that come into play, and they're on the slide. So first of all, what's already committed? So what's already in train? You know, our ability to move things around stops dead in the water if they're already committed. We have to continue with that. The other thing is, what is actually deliverable? So we know full well that $129.4 million cannot be achieved with the constraints at the moment and cost versus volume. So we've heard from Sean and others that everything is costing a hell of a lot more. You know, 30% more is the number that I keep hearing. So budget, so we're spending more, but we're actually doing less. So that has to be a consideration, you know, and you know that you have to take $25 million out of the budget to actually have a 1% impact on rates. But if everything's costing more, then, you know, these are things that have to be very carefully considered. So that is the overview. You've got the detail in front of you. You can reconcile the 88.4 million, the 88.7, sorry, you can reconcile the 88.7 million. It's all in there. This is the most detailed view of our capital works program, where you can see everything that's planned. This slide just takes your A3s and it just groups it by activity, so you can see at an activity where is the planned, or where is the large planned capital spend, and it's in the areas that you'd expect to see. So I don't think there's any surprises there. So I might just stop, Your Worship, and maybe we just open to questions.
Martin.
Thank you for that, Mark. That is really interesting. I just wanted some clarity. Does the budget move with it as well? When you say you push it out to years, does the budget say from this financial year that we don't spend, does that move with it? And then I guess there's the stuff that we say no to, which would come off the budget. But that's maybe being discussed in the long-term plan process. So what you're fundamentally doing is that, just for clarity in my head, we started off at the grey line at 71.3 on the year 24-25. Okay, so that would be the starting point, and then what's happened is that bits have been moved to those threes, which have pushed that line up. Because my first question was going to ask, how come we're talking about an annual plan when there isn't one there? Yes. But so that's all been pushed into that, and that'll be addressed as part of the long-term plan process. Yes. I just want to point that out to other councillors. That's quite significant as a point, because I've been obviously curious what happens to work that doesn't get done, or how does it get moved as such. So thank you for that clarity.
Yeah, so Sean just said it would have to change. It wouldn't be a real number that would be put in front of us. It's just a what's called the deferral.
I guess it's the bow wave of moving things through the LTP. So the
wave.
LTP gives you more certainty over those 3 years as you move through it, because we're not doing an LTP every year. That work tends to fall into the next LTP, and from a financial modelling point of view, it sits in the database in that year, but we don't have the resources to deliver $129 million worth of work. We don't have the capacity to do that, so it's not realistic as an expectation that we would set that as the budgets. A lot of work to go into that yet.
Moving on to Nigel. Thanks.
Madam Mayor?
Sure.
Yep. Taking that train of thought, what will you rate for with regards a specific financial year? If we decide not to do it, in effect, that would have decreased the rates requirement on that particular financial year. So would we be that'll just get caught up in the mix when we look at the long-term plan, will it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, look, just very quickly through you, Madam Chair. what we do is the $88.7 million finance applies its own haircut anyway, and we only draw down the money when we need, but we assume that we'll do a certain amount. The budget will go forward, but when we calculate the interest, we actually only calculate on 6 months of the year anyway. So we apply a haircut and we calculate 6 months of interest. So when we don't do it, it has an immaterial impact on rates.
That's good clarification, thanks. Nigel?
Yep. What proportion of the 129 million, what portion of that relates to Three Waters projects? I just a quick scan showed me about 27 million. Is that about right?
If you've taken the numbers from the A3 spreadsheet and added those together, yeah, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you exactly, but there is a big number there because you've got the Waikanae water treatment plant, and there are a couple of other pipe renewals. Otaki, there's a big job up there. So there is a big chunk of that is, as you referenced before, related to the Three Waters.
Yeah, so I just wonder if there's, I think I raised this once before about whether or not you run a parallel, process, Three Waters in, Three Waters out, because it looks like it's going to be an in or an out. It doesn't look like it's going to be, that there's going to be other potential.
Yeah, we're going to be required to do that.
50 shades
I believe.
of murky
Am I right?
grey.
Yep.
Yeah. So and of course one of the dangers here is that we fall into what I'm going to call the Hut City model, through no fault of any particular person, but over a period of time they've got themselves to a position now where they are just in quicksand, right? So the pushing out thing does actually put you into a place somewhere along the line where you become a headline in the Dom Post that says you're screwed. So that's.
Yeah,
I mean,
can I get a response to that bit?
Yeah. I'm not suggesting that's what you're doing, but.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. But again, there's a difference between renewals and upgrades, and your ability to move new or upgrade works, as opposed to renewals, which are basically the issues that will cause problems with regard to pipe failures. Those are the key elements of your asset management focus that you need to keep ahead of. You do have the ability with new and upgrade works. If you look at the risks around some of those, you can move those around, but really it's, again, and that focus on renewals has been where the council has been more diligent, I guess, and some of the upgrade work has been moved around. But again, things are costing more as well, so there is a big chunk of that in there. But they are big numbers. The Three Waters area, anything you're doing in that space with water treatment, you're into the $10s and $15 million very quickly for those types of asset groups.
Thanks.
And the good bit, Nigel, is that we've got it in the budgets to push around rather than it not being there because there's no appetite for, which is really important.
It's just my final point about that, and having that fully budgeted, absolutely fully budgeted for, is because when it comes to having those conversations about what the Three Water assets are worth, what cost programs are, what debt's been ascribed, etc., you're going to need to have all of that information anyway, right?
Yeah, we're in a really good space with having that information.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more lights, so we're going to move on to draft rates increases, which we've kind of gone over a bit already, so we should be able to scoot through it pretty.
Yes. I think we're going to have to actually. So, look, I think in terms of the key takeaway of this slide is we are sitting at 8.1%, and we've got cost increases, and inflation, depreciation, interest is making up 8.9. We've managed to. We were at 12.4%. We came down 3.8% by reprioritising the better off funding, the capex component of tranche 1. So that's just a quick overview where we've got to. So that's where we're at. We're at 8.1%. Where we've got to with the better off funding. So what what we said to you is we should reapply the $3.1 million of Better Off funding and identify OPEX projects. And we went away at the end of workshop 1 to go and identify, well, what OPEX projects. So the list of projects that 3.1 was for capital projects that we were going to use the Better Off funding. Those projects will still be done, but it'll form part of our CapEx work program. We've gone away and we've had a look, and what we're recommending is that we apply that $3.1 million worth of funding to the maintenance work of wastewater and stormwater for next financial year, which would otherwise be funded through rates. So is it kicking the can down the road? No, it's not. We're using one-off funding to pay for maintenance costs of the Two Waters networks, because we're assuming that the Three Waters reform is still with us and it's going to happen. So come 1 July 2024, we won't have stormwater or wastewater to maintain. So that's the proposal. We've looked at all the projects and we think that we should actually just use it to fund stormwater and wastewater. Big caveat is that we do need to discuss and agree this with our iwi partners. Crown Infrastructure Partners, or DIA, have said that we're allowed to do this as long as what we reassign that funding towards meets the qualifying criteria. And one of those qualifying criteria is that our iwi partners are very happy with this proposal. So this is really a work in progress update. We met you on the 16th of February. And so we have done a lot of work and looking at identifying those projects. What we didn't want to do is we didn't want to recommend that that we were using this funding to fund OPEX costs that were going beyond next year, because that really is kicking the can down the road. Because what do we do the year after that? How do we fund that? So we need to still have that conversation with our iwi partners. And as you heard at the last workshop, is that the conversations we've had with the DIA is that we're not alone in asking to reallocate the tranche 1 of the Better Off funding, but we must make sure that we meet the qualifying criteria, and we believe that the criteria can be met.
Can I just ask a quick question in relation to that?
Yes.
If you're using 3.2 million of Better Off funding for a water purpose, that if Three Waters comes in, you would then be able to claim that amount. But no, you won't. See, so if the Better Off funding was used for, I don't know, build a statue, if it was built for that, and then you funded your water, your stormwater and wastewater, if you had another mechanism for funding that, when it came to a Three Waters settlement, you would then be able to claim that funding, right? Because it's related to your stormwater and wastewater costs.
That would only be if it was CapEx and you were borrowing the money. This is operational cost that is being used. So there's no recovery, refund of operational cost coming as part of the Three Waters establishment. It's the debt number. So what we're talking about here is purely operational costs associated with maintenance activities in the stormwater area and the wastewater area that would sum up to that $3.2 million. And we're not touching water because there's volumetric charges and everything else associated with that. So that's very difficult to look to unravel. But we're going to target to OPEX. And this is Porirua. So early on in the process, not sure if there were any other councils, but Porirua made that decision and allocated all of their 10.1 million, I think it was, into their operational costs for Three Waters. So, and that was approved and signed off by the DIA. So that's why we believe that this is something that's acceptable and meets their criteria.
Okay.
Oh, Liz, sorry.
Oh,
Didn't see you like there.
Well, yeah, I was just going to, are we also looking at the scenario where Three Waters doesn't go ahead? And, what are the risk factors around that? I mean, I don't know how likely or unlikely it is, but we should at least ask the question.
So through you, Madam Chair. So at the moment, so what we've said is, so one of the levers that you've used to get rates down is to not fund the uplift and the depreciation on the Three Waters of 441. So effectively that means we're increasing our non-funded depreciation bucket. So if Three Waters doesn't happen, what we've said is, well, we'll have to claw that back. So because we won't be getting a payout. And so we would at some point we're going to have to rate fund for that. So that is definitely a risk. We are doing all the essential maintenance that we need to do in terms of in year 3. So if the Three Waters doesn't happen, then we've got to claw back that 441.
I just think that's something that needs to be communicated, because if the world changes, we need to, I mean, we just need to set expectations in the community that, hey, we've made some assumptions here, but if it doesn't work out, we're going to have to change our plan.
I will briefly summarise, because we're running out of time, the information campaign. I'll briefly summarise what I've heard loud and clear that you want in that information campaign, and we'll touch on that point.
Okay, I will keep going for another 5 minutes and see if we can get through this slide, and then we just take a slightly shorter lunch break, because we've only got one more slide, so it'd be a shame not to get through it if we can, even if we just park some questions until the next time. So we're now moving on to staffing level update.
So to just run through this at a decent pace. So we've got core services. We've said we're sticking to level 3. Sorry, we're sticking to year 3 of the long-term plan. We're sticking with our strategic outcomes. We're delivering what we plan to do in our activities. And as an organisation, we are constantly looking at what level of resource do we require to be able to do that. So it's a weekly function, and that happens in any business. So we do that. So we are always looking at what levels of staff do we actually need, and what types of skills do we need. We cannot afford to. We've already said at the beginning of this workshop that we are still competing against a very, very competitive labour market in Wellington. We cannot afford to match those salary levels or to even compete against them. So we've heard from our chief executive that some roles are $100,000 more if you go into Wellington and into central government. So vacancies are filled when they need to be filled, or they may be substituted with other roles as and when. In terms of the nature, council it's a relatively simple organisation in terms of the finances, but we're a business of multiple businesses, and so we have a budgeted amount for resource. But if we need to deploy it somewhere else because of something new, then that's what we'll do to make sure that we deliver. At the moment, if we have any unfilled vacancies, it's mainly because we're not offering the right package, in a nutshell. The pay scale might be not right, the job scope might not be right. So it is a constant challenge that we have, and we're not alone. We're not alone in that. We do include a vacancy factor. So when we set our personnel budgets, we do not budget for 100% of our staff positions being filled for 365 days of the year, because that's not what happens in reality. You do always get staff turnover, and it does take time to fill those positions. We are operating on the basis at the moment that it generally takes about 3 months to fill a position. So that's going to market, it's reassessing the job, going to market, interviewing, doing your reference checks, making an offer, and waiting for that person to come over. So it normally takes us, so we have got $1.3 million in our budgets as a vacancy loading. And what that means is it means that our personnel costs reduce by 1.3 million. So it's a credit effectively. And that means that our rates revenue requirement goes down by 1.3. So it reflects what happens in practice. We need to have the budgets so that we can actually employ people. And if we magically could just fill the positions overnight, then we would be $1.3 million over budget. But it's good practice to have the vacancy loading, and we do have that. Now, we had a $1.6 million loading in this current financial year because we just, you know, we are hearing that employers are slowing down a little bit. There's less business confidence, you know, but it depends on who you talk to. You know, Wellington is still a very competitive labour market. So we did increase the vacancy adjustment by a further 600k this financial year. It reduced rates by 600k. The LTP has a 1.3. So effectively what that's done is it's increased our personnel costs by 600k. So vacancy factors, I said that, and in terms of our staffing and how it's filled and when it's filled, that's the responsibility of our chief executive.
Great. Any questions on that slide? Jocelyn, your light was on from before we got onto that slide. Did you have any questions on this slide?
My question is, just to clarify whether this slide and the previous slides are actually in our, they don't seem to be on the hub and they're not in our presentation here. I'm just wondering if that could be.
I've got them here. Maybe Sophie can help you. While you find it, can we move on to Liz?
I don't think they had it. Oh.
Oh, look, yeah, I totally get it in terms of the, you know, you built in that downtime, if you like, for filling the vacancies. I guess when I sort of raised the issue of staff costs, it was rather than seek to immediately fill positions, can we just kind of stretch things out? And so instead of allowing 3 months, we allow 6 months or something to replace people. That was where I was coming from.
I think some cases it's happening now, right?
Yeah, Darren's going to respond to that.
Thank you. Yep, really good point. And just coming back to Mark's point about the daily assessment of what fit for purpose looks like for us. So in some instances, the market is determining what that recruitment period looks like. So yeah, we are stretching past the 3 months. If it's not critical, it might be that, again, coming back to fit for purpose, we do look at stretching what recruitment looks like in that space. And I am very mindful of what the recruiting and the salary budgets look like. So.
Yeah, so we're gonna wrap up there. I've been kind of giving the staff the messages as they go through. If anybody has anything that they disagree with from today or anything they'd like to add, otherwise we're begrudgingly accepting the 8.1 at this point. I heard Nigel say, let's try and get it under 8. And I think he's got a good point, 7.99. And I heard what Glenn said about keeping turning over stones. And the chief executive has given me an assurance that he'll do that, including that latest suggestion of stretching out vacancies. So we'll see how that looks when it comes back. But other than that, thanks for a very productive and wide-ranging session today. And 20 minutes for lunch or half an hour, Martin?